covering recruiting and the transfer portal for the Razorbacks. This is Inside Arkansas Recruiting with Dudley Dawson.
Welcome into the Inside Arkansas Recruiting Podcast presented by GoatLab Brewery. I'm your host, Dudley Dawson, and on today's edition of Inside Arkansas Recruiting, we've got a special guest in Dr. Fitz Hill, a former assistant coach at the University of Arkansas, head coach at Fresno State, and someone who's gone on to do a lot of good things for a lot of people. Excited to have him here. Well, Coach, it's an honor having you on our recruiting podcast. You've been there, done that in a lot of things. Not only were you an assistant coach at the University of Arkansas in the 90s, head coach at San Jose State, and also the father of one of the state's best two-sport athletes in Justice Hill, who signed with Arkansas. Talk to me a little bit about the difference you see from afar now, maybe in recruiting back during your day and the NIL and transfer portal and all that these days.
Well, Dudley, thank you for having me. And I do remember those days being there. It's just been amazing to think that really the relationship span. And when I see kids, now they're young men, grown men. I was there with Coach Hatfield the last year of 1980s, 1989, and I stayed there through Coach Crow to 2000, and so I kind of touched 3 decades of student athletes, and then if I didn't know somebody, then because of somebody in 1989, I felt like I knew somebody in 1988. And what was so special about the 88-89 season, those 2 back-to-back Southwest Conference championships, and that's something that's been hard to come by since we joined the SEC. But to then to go back and to be with Coach Nutt and think about that recruiting time, to your question, from the end of the 80s, the complete decades of the 90s, and then entering the 21st century, to see how those things transpired through coming in as a GA under Coach Crow. And Coach Crow was very, very, very good organized recruiter. And as his GA, he taught me so much about details, being that he had never played the game, but he was just so organized as a chemist that, he was so technical about things. And recruiting Henry Ford, I remember him telling me as his GA sitting in the office, I want you to call Henry Ford every day. I mean, that was the deal, because he was offensive coordinator. And Henry Ford was highly recruited, and he signed him. And when I realized when he went to the DFW area and did that, something that stuck out in my mind. And Henry went on to be a top round draft pick, because Coach Crow always told us, as we sit around the table with 9 full-time coaches, he said, if every coach signs one great one, he didn't want everybody to try to go after 4 or 5 great ones, because he realized the relationships that you built would play out in the end. And that's how he got Henry Ford. And if you go back and look at Clemson, when Coach Ford was doing that, the way that he would talk about, you can't recruit at that time, because it was all relationship driven. You couldn't recruit 5 people with that same intensity. So he said, if everybody signs one each year on the staff, in 4 years, you have 36. He said, that's how they built the Clemson team. That's how they built the Auburn team. But, oftentimes people try to sign all these, 4 or 5 great ones, but you can't do it, and then, because you had to extend the relationship time with the phone calls and over. That's how I ended up getting Anthony Lucas. It was all relationships. Now with NIL, the relationship maybe is a little bit. The NIL now can come in there and make a relationship if the bag is right. And I think it's interesting how, that phenomenon has played out. Unlike, prior to NIL deal, it was all relationship driven. Today, it's about, hey, what the bag's going to be like. We saw that with Tennessee quarterback, going to UCLA. You see all these things taking place. And it's unfortunate that it's not as much relationship, because those are the things that you carry on. When I think about my relationship with my players and the guys, the young men I recruited, and I'm so proud of Marvin Caston. When I think about Anthony Lucas leading the program at Pulaski Academy, when I think about Hubert Laudermill, even Boo Williams, I mean, just all that I don't want to, just they're like sons to me because of the relationship that we had. Well, I couldn't give them any money. I couldn't give them anything, but hey, listen, I'm your guy. You need something, you come in here, hey, you're going to get educated, you're going to graduate, and I'm going to be a part of your life forever. Well, that was the whole deal. And that's what Coach Crow did with Henry Ford's mother, because when she came up on the trip, man, they were just talking and everything. You could tell that he had established that relationship, with Henry Ford. And so I modeled that for Anthony Lucas' parents, all the people, that we had, Richard Smith, all those kids that we have, Ken Anderson. It was the relationship piece that you could have, Sparky Hamilton, with those highly recruited players, that you realize, hey, make it too hard for them to tell you no, because you have a relationship and they don't want to disappoint you. Now, if the money is not right, they can tell you no.
It's one of the things I always wondered, when you're going through a season in Arkansas's 2-2 right now, two heartbreaking losses after two big wins. When you're recruiting during the season, how much of that time did it take up back in the day as opposed to getting ready for a football game? Because even though there wasn't the rules and stuff there is now, you had to pay attention to kids, but you had to win ball games to keep those kids.
Yeah, and it was the old saying, if you're recruiting then and you're not preparing for football, you're recruiting for somebody else. So the deal is now is that, it's a double-edged sword, that you have to be able. If you're not winning, you're not going to be recruiting. If you're not recruiting, you're not going to be winning. So I mean, that you have to strategize that, and that's why I think the difference today is that the staff, though, that you have and the people that you can hire. I mean, you only had 9 assistants. What you had, 4 or 5 GAs, and you didn't have all the director of this. And then, I was, my guy who was my assistant at Arkansas, Justin Krause, I think at Florida State, he's now the recruiter for the defensive side of the ball. Then you got a recruiter for the offensive side of the ball. Then you got a director of recruiting. Then you got a director of operations. We didn't have all that. And so, we were breaking down film. We were looking at we were evaluating film. We were calling recruits, as we could. And then the rule changed. You can only call once a week. Right, back when Coach Ford was, when Coach Crow was there in 89, 90s, there was unlimited calls. Well, then the recruiting rules changed, and then you go once a week, and all those type of things that came into play, and so that really, I think, you could not work anybody. You had to make sure when you had the opportunity to call that you strategize your conversations, because prior to that new one time a week rule, which, and I'm not sure what it is right now, but prior to the one time a week rule, you couldn't just call and say hello, because if you did, you didn't have a relationship. Unlike prior to that with Henry Ford, I could just call and say hello. Coach Crow would call the other night. So when Henry showed up, he had a relationship with people on the staff, because we had made those contacts. But right now, in a situation like at University of Arkansas, I mean, yes, you have to be in constant contact, but if you're not winning, as they said, you're recruiting for somebody else, because the likelihood you won't be there.
Yeah, social media has certainly turned things
Changed,
around,
changed the
with
game.
both recruiting and with coaches. Obviously, y'all had some great years when you were here, and some when there was some acrimony. But how do coaches these days go about putting that out of their minds and trying to go out and say this weekend, go out and beat a Notre Dame team that's better than probably its 1-2 record?
Yeah. It's really, it's a detachment, because as a coach, and I've been fired, San Jose State, and I've been at University of Arkansas, and I've observed a lot of firings, during my 12 years there. So you can't work thinking about, the consequences. You have to work thinking about what are you going to do to improve on last week. So, and it's intense focus on what you have to do. I used to always say control the controllables. So you can't really worry about the things you can't control. The things you have to worry about is not, I remember, what was his name? Bill Curry told me before one of the games when I was head coach that I knew him from FCA, and he came to talk to me. And I never forget what he told me for a game I was getting ready to play. He said, "Coach, listen, let me tell you something," because he was a great, great guy to me, a mentor always, a faith-based guy, and I just love Coach Curry. He said, "Coach, when you go look at the game on Sunday," he said, "I used to tell my young coaches this all the time." He says, "Not how you win it, it's how you lose it." And if you think about the fact that how Arkansas could really be 4-0 right now, then you look at the mishaps. Drop touchdown passes probably the reason you talking to me as a former coach. I mean, those type of things that come then and make those, those isolated plays that have lifelong impact. Just because of a missed first down or a block kick or something like that, because the game is so commercialized today, so revenue driven today, and social media drives such an opinion, and like Lane Kiffin always jokes about how Paul Feinbaum got him fired because he got on the show and started saying he needs to go. Well, how it's amazing how people who never coached the game can decide who's qualified to coach, and who needs to be coaching and who needs to be fired. But that's the world we live in today, and that's the social media, that's the commercialization of the game, because that's the sponsors that buy it. And so, hey, that's a good thing about the players now, getting the cash in and get some of that revenue.
Before we had a couple other questions I wanted to ask you before we get out of here. We want to again thank our sponsor, GoatLab Bread, GoatLab Brewery. GoatLab Bread is the new one, opened in Fayetteville, just down in Oak Plaza on North Garland, right around the area Mr. Burger used to be, Coach Hill. And they've got GoatLab has great brews like Razorback, Tusk Light. Also has great food, signature burgers, and then they have this thing I really like on Sunday morning. You can have 2 GoatLab brews or 2 mimosas along with all the pancakes you can eat. And
Man.
so
You
so
probably
that's a
heard
good
you probably heard them, don't you, Dudley?
yeah, so that's a good deal for $16. As we said, they've also got the original one in Lowell, which serves great stuff too. And it's going to be your new Goat Lab game day. Is going to be your new Goat Lab tradition. And you this Saturday you will either have a chance after the ball game, since it starts at 11, to go celebrate a win, or drown your sorrows, whichever you want, or get a good meal. But certainly, we thank Bill Adams and his crews there at the 2 places. Coach, obviously one of the acrimony things going on right now is you used to try to lock down the state, get every recruit you can. That's still the case, but out of the top 15 in the state right now, 4 I think are committed to Arkansas. One's going to make his decision in the next couple of weeks. It's tougher to close those borders these days with the plethora of opportunities, TV and all that stuff. And I guess as we talked about the bag, are you happy that you're not in that game now, having to deal with that? And what can you do, as coaches here at Arkansas, to try to get back to where you can get some more guys?
Well, I mean, I think the relational equity takes place and I'm gonna say, in any successful recruiting success, because rarely will a kid, what is the bag, the bag dictates how much you can like a person, because money can allow you to accept things that you maybe wouldn't otherwise. But I still think I learned in the classroom that it's hard for a student to learn from a teacher that he doesn't like. Okay, he or she doesn't like. So it's almost as hard for a kid to play for a person that he's not attracted to, or have a conversation or relationship with, unless the bag is just so great you don't care. But then now you're questioning about what happens when a person, I hear all those things. Well, it doesn't look like they're playing hard. Well, that's what NIL does. It's da 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 da. With the relationship piece, just like for myself, I used to say, hey guys, I need you to go across the middle. I mean, I'm invested in you. You're invested in me. If you don't catch the ball, Coach Hill gets fired. So I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure that you're happy. And that relational piece that you have is that I got you, you got me. Well, in a small state like Arkansas, and I just learned this from Coach Brawls, and I mean, the things that he, being a recruiting coordinator there and sitting in his office and talking to him, and the things that he stressed to me, at that time, because we were trying to expand, things we were doing when he first had the stadium, and all the things that he had the vision, that I had the opportunity to sit there and listen to him talk about recruiting Arkansas. And, then the next person was Coach Harold Horton. And I think, Dudley, if you go and look at it right now, just based, I'm an Arkansas kid, I'm an Arkansas native. So, of course, I have a different perspective than somebody who moves to Arkansas and don't have that relational equity, but our state doesn't produce the number. I was looking yesterday that Georgia's the number one per capita, Louisiana's number two. When you start looking at NFL prospects and those type of things that's coming out. But when I think about recruiting Cedric Cobbs, perfect example. I remember coming in, Houston sent me to Little Rock. Cedric was going to Georgia. All right. The way that we turned Cedric was Coach Rip and Byron Jenkins. I'll tell him to this day. Albert Crawford. It was those relational ties that we had within the state. Then you know what happened? Coach Rip then brought Ced to the game for Quan and Big Word with all his friends. So that whole community relationship is why we turned Ced. Albert Crawford, former Razorback, okay, Byron Jenkins, who I knew from helping me recruit at Arkansas, and Coach Rip driving them up. Well, almost if you ask Marvin Caston, the same thing would happen in Louisiana when he committed to us. He had the same thing happen to him with Coach Baldwin and people taking him down to LSU. But our relational ties and when it came down to it, was so strong. Why? Well, Coach Nutt was from Little Rock. So we had that network of people to surround. That's very, very unique when you have that in your state and you have those relational ties that when a kid go home, it's somebody around the corner saying, hey, well, we want you to stay home. We want you to stay home. Those things that were working in the favor then are things that we possibly don't have now. And I remember sitting down talking to Coach Harold Horton, and he said there after I became recruiting coordinator, and he was the founder, he would say, he great mentor to me in recruiting. He said, Fitz, I'll never forget, every year there's going to be between 8 and 10 SEC caliber players. He said they all won't be developed. He said, but the numbers tell us there will be between 8 and 10 Division I players. He said we have to get 80 to 85% of those players. I mean, 80 to 9. He said we might not get 9, we might get 8, sometimes get 7. He said, but on average, we need to get at least 80% of our players, 8 to 10. Well, if that happens, you get 8 to 10, then in 4 years, you have, you're talking about 40 players. If you get on average, 8 players every year, 5 years on average that they've red shirt or whatever, you got 40 players on average. Some years you got more, but at least then 50% of your team is from the state of Arkansas, which then a lot. But I'm not saying, Dudley, they need to be, players that can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, they got a ball now. You know what I'm saying? And if you go back and look at the I think I did a study. If you go back and look at the 1998 team, you see how many players that we won when we had a chance to play for the national championship and beat Tennessee. Look how many players: Joe Dean Davenport, Zach Painter. Look, David Barrett. Go back and count Grant Garrett. Go back and count how many Razorback Arkansas kids that were on that team that dominated the team who would win the national championship. I mean, so that's a nucleus. And then I think the NIL package from a kid being in the state of Arkansas, then you have some negotiating power because that, running out that hog means running out that A means a lot to kids born into the state. Unlike somebody moving into doing that, then NIL package is something that you look at and said, okay, hey, I'm gonna go here because this is the best opportunity. Because listen, we know only a very small percentage of kids gonna be able to play in NFL. So this is your opportunity to make the money. And so, these are the things that I think that we have to look at strategically and comprehensively if we're going to be competitive within the student athletes that we have. But the relationships that start early are the relationships that play out in the end. And if you don't have those relationships early because you haven't identified, then you're playing catch up at the end. And sometimes when you're not winning, all right, it's hard to play catch up in the end. When you're winning, and I said this, the greatest recruiting success I had while at Arkansas is after we beat Alabama. Always. You go back and look at it. And so I spoke at a church in Alabama the other night. On Monday night, I told you I was traveling. And while I was in there, because, I was with Ron Harris. Ron Harris invited me down, who was AL, to speak at his church because I'm helping recruit some students from down there. So he had introduced me, say this was one of Coach Saban's life coaches and people that were in the church. And I said, well, let me introduce myself to you as the only receiver coach, probably in the history that I know of football, collegiate football, who has 2 TD catching victories in Bryant Denham Stadium in 1995 and 1997 with J.J. Meadows and Anthony Eubanks is Coach Fitz Hill. That's how I want to introduce myself in the state of Alabama. And everybody just looked, and I said, and from that, when you beat Alabama, in Bryant Denham Stadium on national TV, the publicity, go back and look at the recruiting success of Coach Nuts from 98 in the class in 2002 and how that played out. Start looking at Lawrence Richardson and those type of things that we start playing out, because in 1998 we dominated them up in Fayetteville. And boy, that resonated volumes in the recruiting world at that particular time. And Coach Ford, if you go back in 95 and look at the athletes that we had in 98, it came after the 95 victory that you start going back and recruit. So the recruiting, as I call it, the winning residue of beating a team that has won 6 or 7 national championships, it for us at that time, it plays out astronomically for your success. And so, when you're losing, it's tough to recruit. Then you have to really get back on your relationships, Dudley. And if not, you really have to do a great job of evaluating the talent and of the population of people, because the numbers don't lie. And and you don't change. I remember people used to call me and say, "Hey, I got this great receiver. Man, he's a great athlete. 2-sport, do this." And I said, "But he's just 4'6". I said, "Bro, do you see the people I line up against? You see Alabama's corners?" I said, "I can't get off nowhere 4'6". I said, "Coach Ford gonna fire me with 4'6". I said, "If you're not 4'4", don't bring me anything that that can't run." I said, "So everything else I can coach, but running." No, you got to have that type of speed. And that's why Emmanuel Smith, 4'3", Anthony Lucas, 4'3". That's why they were drafted, because they could all run. Richard Smith, 4'4". All these kids had an opportunity to go play. Why? Because they can run. You cannot take Muse to the Kentucky Derby and want people to bet on them. And that's what the SEC is. It's a truly Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I want to thank you again for taking time. I know you're at a conference today. We tried to do it inside, had to come outside. But before I get out of here, obviously, I mentioned earlier that Justice, one of the best two sports stars in the state in a long time. He's now at your alma mater, Ouachita Baptist, finishing his career as a football player. Talk about his journey, just a few minutes about, I guess he was Coach Anderson's last signee here, wasn't he? Coach Mike Anderson?
Right. Arkansas kid, and we, and that's what happens when coaching changes. And once again, the relationship piece that we had with Coach Anderson when I was recruiting coordinator for Coach Nutt. He was recruiting coordinator for Coach Richardson, and we just had that, that all those relationships, going to church, all those things together. And so, but things happen like that all the time. You see that every year in coaching, new coaching change, new coaching style, new coaching philosophy. Justice had really, as his father and understanding the game, we had talked about, the opportunity to play for Coach Anderson and for Coach Morris in football, because we know once that you would go on football scholarship, then once you play on a football game, you can't be on basketball scholarship. So that was the rules. And so, but understanding Coach Anderson's style, how he pressed and how Just was athletic, that would in that system, that would be fine that him to be able to play football, because coming out by semester, then be able to help him press and do the things he wanted to do. We felt like it felt into the system of his size and his athleticism. But when the coaching change happened, it wasn't that opportunity to be able to do that. And so he went to JUCO and had a very successful JUCO year prior to COVID. Then went to Murray and had long COVID, and and struggled. We didn't know because Justice was very asthmatic, and we didn't know what was going on because after he had the COVID, lose started not playing well and couldn't lost 20% of his lung capacity, but we didn't know what was going on. Finally, he was able to come back and have a very successful year where they end up going to the NCAA, one of the highlights of his careers, but never could get cleared to play football because of his lung capacity. The doctor was not didn't feel safe about him having an opportunity to go out there. The way the breathing, the reaction times, the reactions to recovery time of his breathing that he was really concerned about. And so after going to LSU, and he had some few personal issues to take place with his family, and then struggled a little bit there, and found his groove. The first semester at Loyola, and was really playing well, and broke his hand, and that was really tough on him, and started the red shirt there. But at that time, thinking he had another semester to play football, and then that became a complicated issue. Finally got that worked out. Finally, the doctor, thought that he could, he's still monitoring him real closely because, those things can flare up because, basketball game before, he's had to be rushed to the hospital before because of his breathing. All these things, have kind of played into the way that thinks that this is an opportunity to see if we can work himself back because he had eligibility to still play football. So we're kind of filling it out, and it's a double-edged sword for me as a dad and former coach. But I try to be there when he needs me and give advice. Probably too much advice, but I try to stay on the sideline until he puts me in the game, and then I try to give him experience. But God has truly blessed him with some great experiences from high school to I won the state championship at Little Rock Christian. One of the highlights of my coaching career as a father, to observe that, and then to leave there and to go to have a outstanding year as a first-year JUCO, player and All-American Player of the Year there, and then to lead his team as point guard to the NCAA at Murray State. So, even through his challenges, man, God has blessed him with such tremendous opportunities that that some people only dream about. And so now we're just kind of seeing where God is taking with the opportunity. Had some scouts, particularly, had a chance to play across in Europe, but had a few football scouts telling that, hey, based on his football resume, that a little bit more development because of his athleticism, that he could possibly have a chance to explore that as an opportunity. So we're trying to see how that works out. Don't know how. Hopefully, he'll continue to improve with his health issues, with his breathing. COVID always something that we have to worry about. We don't know how it's going to trigger his asthma, so we're just kind of praying and hoping through that, and kind of seeing what's happening. But thanks for asking about him. I'll let him know, Dudley, that you did ask about him.
Well, whether I address you as Dr. Hill, Coach Hill, or President Hill, I guess now that you're back at Arkansas Baptist, I appreciate you taking time with us. Really enjoyed
I love be calling Coach. Coaches, that's who I am. Even when I'm whatever I am, I consider myself a coach, and I thank God for my relationships that I've had with the players to be able to coach them. And my 12 years in Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas, as Coach Nutter, we always say, was some of the best days of my life. And hopefully, the Hogs get it turned around this weekend and bounce back. And it's really interesting. I was sharing that when you play a game like that, the Hogs, they have a great opportunity to win this game on Saturday, because when your back's against the wall is when you play the best.
All right, Coach, I appreciate it.
God bless you. Thanks a lot for having me, Dudley.
You bet. Again, I want to thank Dr. Fitz Hill for joining us on the show today. As we mentioned, Coach back here at Arkansas back in the day, and has done a lot of things over a lot of years. Just appreciate everyone watching and listening to the Inside Arkansas Recruiting Podcast, of course, presented by GoatLab Brewery. Be sure to subscribe to us here at Inside Arkansas on YouTube, as well as subscribing to the audio version anywhere that you can get your podcast. I'm Dudley Dawson. And it's, as I'm always signing off with now, remember yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift. Go out and make the world better.